So picture this. You're walking through the transition area with your bike as part of bike check-in the day before your first Ironman or half Ironman race. At some point, a very helpful official will come up to you and advise you need to lower the pressure in your tires so that your tubes don't burst while it's sitting in transition the day before the race. In this video, I'm going to tell you to completely ignore that advice, and that's going to be one of 5 tips I'm going to give you on what you should be doing with your tires and tubes ready for one of your first Ironman races. Hello, my name is Julian and welcome to the show. Number 1, make sure you check your tires and tubes at least a week or 2 before the race. Don't be doing that the night before bike check-in or even the morning of bike check-in. The reason for that is if you're going to change anything like putting new tubes on your bike, you should be doing that a week or 2 beforehand when you've got at least one more training ride still to do. If you do a long training ride, which for a half Ironman 2 weeks before might be 30 or 40 miles, or if it's a full Ironman a couple of weeks before, you might be still tapering, or you might have started your tapering, you might be doing something like an 80 mile, 85 mile ride. If you've got any problems at all with either faults with the tube, faults with the valve, you've got a pinch fault where you've got the tube pinched between the bead of the tire and the rim of the wheel, or you've got an issue with the rim tape that goes around the rim of the wheel underneath that tube. If you've got a problem with any of those, it will manifest itself at some point. Far better it does that on one of your training rides when you can take the time to deal with it than on a race where it could potentially ruin your entire day. What I don't think you should do is change your tubes the day before bike check-in, or even, as I have sometimes seen, the morning of bike check-in. Pedal around the hotel parking lot a couple of times and go, yeah, that's good. Or worse still, pedal it into transition and just say, that looks about right, that looks okay. It's possible that some of the things that can go wrong with a tube inside a tire don't manifest themselves and don't reveal themselves when you're doing like 50, 60 yards just before you check your bike in. Number 2, make sure you know how to change your tubes on your bike, front and rear, long before race day, and make sure you're confident and comfortable in doing it. You can rely on the bike techs out on the bike course, but you might have to wait 20 or 30 minutes for one to come your way. If you can change your own tubes, in theory, you can be back up and running again after a puncture within like 5 or 6 minutes. So I really think it'd be a good idea to do it. Now, if you're doing a lot of training rides, you're statistically going to get a puncture or 2 anyway at some point during 1,000 or 2,000, maybe 1,500 miles of riding in a season. Use that opportunity to learn how to change them. Number 3, pack spare tubes on your bike for the race. Now, I always carry 2 tubes, and I do that for 2 reasons. Firstly, I'm very conservative when it comes to spare parts. Secondly, I have a disc wheel on the back and I have a Zip 808 on the front. So the valve stem needs an extender for both of them. And one of them is a lot longer than the other. So I actually have one set up for the front wheel and one set up for the rear disc wheel as well. What I tend to do is you can take a tube, and I'm using Continental race tubes and Continental Grand Prix tires. But the new tubes, I can compress them down, get them into a Ziploc, a snack size Ziploc, and then compress everything outside that Ziploc bag with bar tape. That does a couple of things. Firstly, you get a little bit more protection using the Ziploc bag, but secondly, it actually stops all the sticky residue off the bar tape from getting into contact with the tube. So you can wrap that up really tight. I take one of those then, and that goes up very nicely underneath my saddle, and it's completely out of the way and not obstructing anything. The other one I usually strap to the outside of my rear bottle cage. So I've got one of them visible, if you like, probably disrupting the airflow, but I'm 6'2", 200 pounds, so let's not talk about airflow right now. The other one's up under the saddle, so it's not really in the way at all. It is actually a good idea to be carrying some spares with you with some of the training rides you're doing, so in all probability, you've probably got a tube or 2 on you anyway as a result of all your training rides. Number 4, before you walk your bike through bike check-in into transition before the race, make sure you've inflated your tires to the correct pressure. Now, I'm running 100 PSI on my rear wheel and I'm running 95 PSI on my front wheel, and I'm fairly consistent with that. The 95 as opposed to 100 on the front, I have it a little bit softer because I've had way too many races where I encounter 30 or 40 miles of chip seal, and in the case of Ironman Texas, chip seal and a headwind. And at 100 PSI, my teeth are chattering by the end of it. So I find just lowering that pressure just a little bit just gives me a little bit more comfort on what is, at the end of the day, a pretty long ride during your Ironman race. Number 5. Okay, so the first 4 tips here are things that I think you should do. Number 5 is a tip of something I think you should not do. And that comes back to what I said at the beginning of this video. As you're walking your bike into transition during bike check-in, let's assume this is a hot race, okay? And I've done Ironman Texas a number of times, Ironman Louisville, which sadly is no longer on the calendar, a number of times, Ironman Chattanooga a number of times, and at the times I was doing them, all 3 of them were in very hot climates, when sometimes the race day temperatures could be in the 90s. So when you're walking your bike through as part of bike check-in and the temperature's 90 degrees and the sun's beating down, and someone who knows what they're talking about says you need to lower your tire pressure because otherwise your tube is going to burst. And then they will always follow it up with, we already had one that burst earlier on today. And it's always one. I'm going to tell you to thank them politely, but not to act on their advice. And do not lower the air pressure in your tires. And I'm going to tell you that for 2 reasons. The first reason is just the science behind it. For air to expand from, let's say, 100 psi up to a level where it will affect the integrity of the tube and cause the tube to burst inside the tire, the ambient temperature, even with the sun beating down, has got to be very, very high compared to the ambient temperature that you are already standing at. I'm going to tell you that's very, very unlikely. What's more likely is that you have got a pinch or a rim tape issue, or potentially just a faulty valve or faulty tube that hasn't manifested itself yet. So remember point 1, make sure you do at least 1 training ride with your tubes before you regard them as being good to go. I have never ever come across in 10 Ironman races and 10 half Ironman races in my career so far, I've never come across anyone who can confidently say their tube burst and the only thing that was wrong was the temperature that the bike was sitting at during the time from checking it into bike check-in to race day the following morning. So that's the science side of it. Now here's the second part of my reason why I do not think you should be taking air out of your tires during bike check-in. You will need to put that air back into those tires on race morning. That means you need to bring a pump into transition as part of your routine before the swim start. Transition opens in plenty of time, so you do have plenty of time in transition before the swim start. But in my mind, you should be using that to put Gatorade in your BTA, maybe putting gels in your bento box if you haven't done that already, making sure your skewers are tight, making sure your brakes are not binding on the wheels and your wheels rotate freely, and also making sure, as everyone's racked their bikes the previous day, that your bike hasn't been moved or disrupted or something on it has been disrupted. Oh, and put your Garmin head unit on there as well. And these days with the great battery life, just switch it on and don't worry about it. I don't really recommend that you add to that reinflating your tires. You are going to be pumped, excited, nervous, anxious, cold, maybe dark as well. And in that situation, you're going to be pumping your tires up in a very narrow space because you've got bikes on each side of you. Remember, there could be 1,800 to 2,500 people in this Ironman race. There's going to be a lot of bikes on those racks, and you've got to get in amongst everything along with everybody else and then start putting air into your tires. I really don't think you should be doing it. Now, I have a disc wheel at the back, and that also means I need to use, I think this is officially called a zip disc inflation device. It's a crack pipe. That's what it is. It's a crack pipe. But you've actually got to hold that on the valve on the wheel at the same time as you're trying to pump it up, which means you need 3 hands because you need a hand to hold it on the wheel and you need 2 hands to be able to pump the bike pump. If I try and pump a bike pump with 1 hand, I can maybe get to 60, 65 PSI. I certainly can't get up to 100. So that means I need to ask the help of somebody else who may also be pumped, nervous, anxious, dark, cold, trying to pump up their own tires. And of course, we're triathletes. We'll all help each other. There's no question of that. But it's just another moving part that you have to deal with. So my routine when I get into transition is to check my brakes are not binding on my wheels. I check my skewers to make sure my skewers are tight and my wheels are straight in the frame. I load up Gatorade in my BTA. I maybe put the gels in my bento if I haven't already done that. I'll put my Garmin head unit on, and these days, thank you Garmin, I'll be able to switch it on and not worry about the battery life at all. And then I would just give a quick squeeze of the side of my front and rear tire and just see how much resistance I have. If they feel firm, relatively firm, I don't touch them. I just leave them exactly as they are. They're not going to feel quite as firm as the day before when you pump them up, because in all likelihood, you pump them up when the ambient temperature was higher than it is on the early hours of race morning. If it feels noticeably soft, well, then you pull the bike out. Then you've obviously got to address some issue with your tubes. But in all likelihood, your tubes are going to be exactly as they were when you left them the day before. There is one exception to this 0.5, and that is if you're using latex tubes. If you're using latex tubes, and the key benefit of latex tubes is they are much lighter than rubber tubes, and therefore your rotating mass is lower, and therefore you potentially can accelerate faster during the bike leg. And there's a couple of other benefits too, but that's the one that sticks out to me. There's a couple of disadvantages to latex tubes. Firstly, they are more prone to pinch issues than a rubber tube is because they're naturally thinner. And secondly, they are slightly porous, which means that they actually let air out over a period of time. So if you use latex tubes, you will definitely be inflating them every few days. So if you inflate it in the morning of bike check-in, 20 hours later when you come back to it before the swim start, you probably got to put some air in them. So if you're using latex tubes, then yeah, pump your tires up that morning. I use latex tubes for a couple of races. I'm a triathlete, right? So when someone tells me something's going to save a few seconds, I'll try it. I'll buy it and I'll try it. I didn't really see any material benefit over what I was doing before in terms of my performance. And on top of that, I had the risks and the fact that I had to pump the tires up in the morning, and I didn't really want to do that. So there you go. 4 tips on what you should do with your tires and tubes before an Ironman or half Ironman race. And one thing I do not think you should do at all. I hope this was useful. Please let me know in the comments below if it was, and also if there's any similar sorts of tips and ideas that you want to hear from me relating to Ironman, half Ironman races. I'm really enjoying the comments and some of the videos I've done before and the discussions that are taking place. So do let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.